And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day."
I live on Morden Street in the village.
Haven't got time to take you there.
Where are we going?
My apartment.
Oh, gay.
Oh, man! You kissed a girl! That is so gay!
All this gayness, what has it got to do with the firmament? Well, I'm attempting to illustrate that the meaning of words change over time, and we do not get to choose what a word means, even if we find a certain usage offends our sensibilities. A word will mean, at any given time, in any given context, for any given person, what they understand it to mean. Nothing more and nothing less. The Simpsons is evidence that gay does mean lame or stupid for some people, and has done since at least the 1980s. It's unlikely that the next Bourne movie will be called The Gay Bourne, because we've left that context behind. And you would be unlikely to describe a female prostitute as gay, unless of course she was gay. You see what I mean? And in considering what a word meant in usage many years ago, context is everything. Hold that thought as we continue. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word firmament first appears in circa 1250 CE. The story of Genesis and Exodus is an early English text, a song or poem translated out of the Latin of the Bible. I shall spare you my poor pronunciation. A modern rendering of this might be, "On the second day, this middle earth was shuttered and all enclosed. God spoke the firmament into being, all about the sky," or heavens. I post this for two reasons. One I'm about to comment on. The other's to show you how English has changed in the centuries since this was written. Walkney here is related to welkin or velkin. It's an archaic word, but you might still find it in your Oxford English Dictionary. Now, I got into a debate with a self-proclaimed language expert on YouTube recently, who stated that welkin, velkin, and firmament are synonymous. You see the cunning of my introduction yet? Now, I do not claim to be a language expert, but to state that velkin and firmament are synonyms is, to my mind, simply ridiculous. Certainly you can look them up in your OED and find synonymous definitions, as you can for firmament and heaven. But this is the nature of language, it develops. The scribe writing in 1250 had a clear understanding of the difference between firmament and velkin, as the original scribes of Genesis had a clear understanding of the difference between raqia and shamayim. For the scribe of the story of Genesis and Exodus in 1250, firmament meant the structure which formed the dome of the heavens. What did it mean for the writers of Genesis? Firmament comes from the Latin. Firm is suggestive of something with solidity to it. The King James has taken this from the Latin Vulgate, rather than using the Greek Septuagint, which renders the word as stereoma, the root stereo meaning solid. So both stereoma and firmament were used to translate the Hebrew word raqia, which is the noun form of the root verb raqa, which the OED tells us means to tread, to beat or pound out, as with metals, or to spread out, and no one seems to dispute that definition. But is the raqia of Genesis solid or something else? I would think that anyone looking up into the night sky as the stars slowly turned overhead could be forgiven for imagining they were attached to some celestial sphere.
Let me tell you a joke. Somebody apparently once went up to the great philosopher Wittgenstein and said, what a lot of morons people back in the Middle Ages must have been to have looked every morning at what's going on behind me now. the dawn, and to have thought that what they were seeing was the sun going round the earth. To which Wittgenstein replied, yeah, but I wonder what it would have looked like if the sun had been going round the earth. Point being, of course, it would have looked exactly the same. You see what your knowledge tells you you're seeing.
Paul Seeley, an evangelical Christian, has written widely on why Christians should not try to look for scientific inerrancy in the Bible. What does Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis have to say in response to Seeley's paper? Okay, I'm not going to read the entire article to you. You can read it for yourself. I'll try not to take it out of context, and let's see what it says. It starts off with, the argument from these Bible critics is that the ancient Hebrews believed in a solid dome with the stars embedded in the dome. They say that the word firmament reflects the idea of firmness, and this reflects erroneous cosmology. Therefore, the Bible is not the inspired word of God, and we don't need to listen to its teaching. Well, that's not what they say at all, of course. Seeley is an evangelical Christian, and he is not telling anyone to ignore the Bible. Though to be fair to Ken, he does realise that allowing anyone to question a single word of the Bible gives them licence to question every word. The article carries on. But what does the Hebrew word actually mean? The Hebrew noun raqia is derived from the verb raqia, which means to spread abroad, stamp or stretch. Okay. However, we must remember that the context always determines the meaning of a word, not just the etymology of the word or how it may be used in other verses. He then goes on to say this understanding is consistent with the terminology of many other verses. A bit of a contradiction, but anyway. Cites Psalms and Isaiah, which speak of the stretching out of the heavens. The Hebrew word used in these verses for heaven is not raqia, but shamayim, literally heavens. However, in Genesis 1:8, God explicitly calls the expanse heaven, thus equating raqia with shamayim. Now, whether it's called the expanse, dome, or called whatever, expanse and solid are not mutually incompatible. You would not be confused if I described an airport runway as an expanse of concrete. Anyway, he goes on. Genesis 1 is perfectly worded for what the author wanted to communicate. It says nothing more than God created the sky and its constituent elements while remaining completely silent about what those elements were. It really depends upon where one starts. If one starts with the presumption of a solid dome, one will read that into the text. However, if one starts with a modern conception of sky, the text permits that understanding as well, and hence there's no contradiction. Well, no, because even if we accept Ken Ham's explanation, he's left with a small problem. Well, actually, left with countless trillions of extremely large problems. Because just a verse or two on in the Great Genesis Creation Science textbook, we have this. And so we have the sun and the moon and each of the countless trillions of stars set in the firmament. And above them? Well, that is where the water separated from the water was put. How does Answers in Genesis deal with this? Well, after going into detail to explain definitions and why raqia means what Ken wants it to mean, Answers in Genesis then claims that we would hardly expect the author of Genesis to make distinctions between things like stellar matter, methane gas, asteroids, comets, etc. A simple elemental term, waters, would be sufficient. The author of Genesis, that would be God, would it not? Because there was no human witnesses to this creation. And Ken wants us to believe that stars, planets, moons, asteroids, comets and gases could all be lumped in under the heading water. Excluding, of course, the star, moons, planets, asteroids, comets and gases, which are not, because they are inside the firmament rather than beyond it. As always, it's up to you to decide on the logical consistency here. So we can, or I can, instantly see some absurdities. That the waters above the firmament, which some creationists will claim contributed to the flood, would have had to fall from beyond the furthest stars to reach the earth, and any claim that these waters somehow affected the Garden of Eden's climate or protected its inhabitants from harmful radiation have no basis in biblical teaching. And whether creationists want to claim the waters above were waters, which is most likely, as they are called waters 4 times and nothing else, is irrelevant because they are supposedly out beyond the furthest stars. And finally back to the text where it says, and God called the firmament heaven. There was evening and there was morning, a second day. Well, I hope here that I've shown that despite it here saying God called the firmament heaven, that the firmament is the dome, the sky, above which is held the heaven. And also shown the nonsense of the water being above that. I'm going to call it a day here because I like to keep these videos shorter than even this one is. I hope I've given you something to think about, hopefully given you a desire to read more and learn more. As always, thank you very much for watching.